Since you came early, you shouldn't just sit here for 10 minutes. So I show you, we have 10 minutes before the program. My specialty now is to develop little games, Planungsspiele, which can be used to teach about ideas related to Wachstums, Klimawandel, and so forth. And so I will show you two of these games. And these are games which you can use. So I mean, these are simple games, and you can, after you see them, then you can use them. And I don't do them during my speech. So here's one. During my speech, so starting at 3 o'clock, I will be talking about the future. Of course, the future is not certain. We don't know exactly what is coming. We see some things, and other things we don't know. So it's a big problem for us to look at all of this information and have some idea, what does it mean? It's something like a code, a cipher, trying to look at information about the future and understand the meaning. So I'm going to give you some practice. I have invented a code, and I'm going to use this code to show you different numbers. To make it simple, I will just only show 5 different numbers, a 1, or a 2, or a 3, or a 4, or a 5. Okay? And so I will show one number using my code, and each of you has to say, what number is he showing? Don't speak, just do it in your head. And then I'll tell you. Of course, the first time, most of you won't know the number because you don't know the code. But after some times, I hope you learn the code, and it is very simple. Okay. I put this down. Are you recording? No, what are you? You can hear me, so you hear it. Here we go. What number am I showing you? So besides what you think. Okay. I'm showing you a 4. Who thought that I was showing 4? Raise your hand. About 20%. Of course. Red. Try it again. I'm showing you a 1. Who thought I was showing you a 1? Raise your hand. Let's try it again. I'm showing you a 2. Who thought I was showing 2? Now I'm showing 3. Now I'm showing 4. Now what am I showing? 5. You see, the code is so simple. It's just like the future factor. But if you only look inside the box, you never understand. Our problem is, our political leaders, our economists, they draw a little box, and they say the future is in there someplace. And you never can understand it. But if you throw away their box and look around, then you start to see what's really happening. That's what I will talk about. So this is called out of the box. And it's a very useful way to even small children to say, you know, don't let somebody else give you the box. You pick your own box. And then you can be much more comfortable. One more. How many of you have a piece of paper and pencil? Raise your hand. Most. Okay. It's fun. I need one volunteer. Thank you, Igor. So, take out a piece of paper and a pen. I am going to make here two pictures. Number one and number two. And Ingo Schwartz is going to be here. He's going to look at these pictures, and then he will have 60 seconds to describe picture number one. You can use any words, in German, of course, but no, nothing. Keep your hands in your pocket. And you have to listen to what he says and make the picture. Okay? Then we stop, and then I give him 60 seconds, and he will describe picture two. And again, you listen. No question, just listening. And you try to draw what he's telling you. And then I will show you the pictures and we'll see how you did. Okay. Are you ready, Mr. Schwartz? Okay. Just not. Wait. So, are you ready?
So, Bild Nummer 1. Denken Sie an den Kasten, ein Quadrat. In der Mitte zwei konzentrische Kreise und diagonal von oben nach unten einen Pfeil.
That's only 10 seconds. Are you finished? Or you want to do it again?
Ich glaube, das was wir einen Kasten, den Sie vorher gesehen hatten, also ein Quadrat zwischenzeichnend, da sind zwei Kreise ineinander, ein größer als der andere, und diagonal von links oben nach rechts unten ein Pfeil.
Only 34 seconds. Fantastic. Okay, so finish. That's number one. Now we're going to do number two. Ready, Mr. Schwartz?
Wieder ein Kasten. In der Mitte ist kein Kreis, sondern eine Schleife, die unten links anfängt, einen Kreis macht, unten rechts aufhört und in der Mitte eine Wellenlinie.
Are you finished? He's finished, so you must be finished. Okay, let's see. So let's see, how did you do? Everyone who has a picture which looks something like this one, raise your hand. Quite good. Everyone who has a picture that looks something like this, raise your hand. Let's see. Yes, I agree. Not quite so good, but okay. Now that's quite good. So, here's an interesting thing. Actually, this picture is more complicated than this one. It has more lines, more shape. But in this group, more people got this one than this one. Why? But why was it generally in this audience, almost everybody did this one correctly, and maybe only half, or 40%, did this one correctly, even though this one is more complicated. Why?
The elements are more simple, so it's simple geometric.
So the
There's shared meaning about this kind of the symbols in the Greek letter.
you were saying the same thing. For this figure, the shapes are ones where we have common words: circle, square, arrow, concentric, so forth. And not only in Deutsch, but in English or in French or almost every language. This one. These shapes, now this, of course, the quadrant is okay, but inside these, there we don't have standard shapes or standard names for these things. So you have to start using metaphors or analogies, etc. See, this is the problem we have in thinking about sustainable development. For 300 years, our society has been pursuing growth. So we have developed data for growth, we have institutions for growth, we have a vocabulary for growth. It's easy for us to talk about growth. But we haven't been talking for 300 years about sustainable development and equilibrium. And so we don't have a shared vocabulary. This has a very precise meaning in English. And the English word and the German word have exactly the same meaning. But take, for example, nachhaltigkeit. Sustainability actually is a little different from nachhaltigkeit. Or resilience. We say in English resilience, but in German you would say maybe more Stabilität or something like that. And it's not quite the same. It will take us 50 years before finally we start to have widely shared vocabulary for talking about these things. So we have to understand that it's difficult for a group to sit down and start to think about this new situation. We don't have the words. It's natural, but we just have to, we say in English, make allowances. We have to understand that when we say words, even if you are speaking to someone in German, when you say the words, they may have a slightly different understanding of it. And so we have to, to make sure that we can still make success even though the words are not available. So this is a little game about the difference between sustainable development and growth vocabulary. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ja, wir haben schon angefangen, wie einige mitbekommen haben. Herr Meadows meinte, wir sollten ja keine Zeit verlieren und doch schon mal mit einer kleinen Übung oder zwei kleinen Übungen anfangen. Ja, ich heiße Sie schon mal herzlich willkommen zu dieser außerordentlichen Veranstaltung, hatte ich glaube ich auch schon mal geschrieben oder gesagt. Ja, es ist eine große Ehre für uns, Sie heute hier bei uns zu haben. Ich hatte auch irgendwo was aufgeschrieben, was ich noch alles sagen wollte, ist aber gar nicht so entscheidend, denn entscheidend sind Sie, was Sie mich heute hier uns mitteilen. Sie hatten uns vorhin auch gefragt, als wir uns zuerst getroffen hatten, was wünschen wir uns denn? Ich hatte dann gesagt, einfach schnell Optimismus. Da hatten Sie dann gesagt, oh Gott, nein, das geht so nicht, wenngleich ich sagen muss, der Umstand, dass wir alle hier so zusammengekommen sind, dass Sie spontan hier so einen Einstieg gewählt haben, dass uns allen hier das Thema nachhaltige Entwicklung, Zukunft bewegt, hier im Hause, aber natürlich vor allem in der Schule und im Unterricht. Das ist eigentlich schon Optimismus wert und dennoch, es bedarf eigentlich oder an sich einfach viel mehr Radikalität und viel mehr Entschiedenheit, damit sich doch nachhaltig sich etwas tut. Und damit habe ich jetzt schon eigentlich das Entscheidende gesagt, aber ich möchte kurz doch nochmal an Herrn Edler, Vertreter des Hauses hier, kurz übergeben.
Das ist eigentlich gar nicht nötig. Also ich stelle ihn nochmal vor, Gerd Vetter, bei uns der Spezialist für globales Lernen. Mein Name ist Kurt Edler, Referatsleiter Gesellschaft an diesem Institut. Wir freuen uns, dass so viele von Ihnen gekommen sind. Und das Veranstaltungsformat ist ganz schlicht. Dennis Meadows ist selbst das Programm. Ich danke ihm auch nochmal ganz herzlich, dass er zu uns gekommen ist. Und nach dem Vortrag von Herrn Meadows wird es möglich sein, Fragen zu stellen. Und die dürfen Sie auch auf Deutsch stellen, denn, auch wenn er das eben noch nur in Ansätzen gezeigt hat, er versteht Deutsch und wenn wir ein Problem haben mit der Übersetzung, dann machen wir das, sodass niemand daran gehindert ist, auch Fragen zu stellen, wenn er sich vielleicht auf Englisch geniert. Herr Meadows, it's your partner.
I have been in Germany on this trip 2 weeks. This is my 26th speech. My last one, but my best one, because for me, teaching and teachers are the most important. And my whole life, I was a teacher. That was my main goal. And so I respect and I am very thankful for teachers and for students. And therefore, I'm happy to be here. I hope this program will be useful to you in some way. Redefining the concept of sustainable development so it is useful to us in this century. It's my title. In 1972, so 40 years ago, with my team at MIT, I developed a computer model which showed the long-term future possibilities for population growth and industrial growth, food production, and so forth. It's not possible to predict the future. Too many things are not known, and also the future will be influenced by us, by our decisions, which we don't know yet. So we didn't make one picture of the future, we made 13. Using different assumptions about psychological variables, for example, desired family size, how many babies do families want to have, about consumption levels, how many cars people want to have, different assumptions about the physical and the biological aspects of the planet. For example, if there is a lot of oil or not so much oil, or the agricultural lands we take care of them or we just let them degrade, etc. So we made 13 different pictures of the future. Roughly half were like this, what we can call overshoot. And roughly half of our future pictures were like this, which we can call sustainable development or equilibrium. of course, this is 1972, and here's 1972. And until 1972, both sides are the same, of course, because from 1900 until 1972, that was history. At least we did know history. We didn't know the future, but we knew history. So both were the same. In 1972, we still expected that there would be 40 years of growth. Here we are now. So we still expected that for 40 years there would be growth no matter. But we said, if we don't start to change in 1970s, those decisions, those policies, those actions which give growth for 40 more years then lead to serious problems. And the timing of these problems is uncertain, but in our model, generally speaking, they occur in this period, 2010 up until, let's say, 2050, so in that period. And be careful. If I ask you to look at this curve and to say, where will the global society have the biggest trouble, probably you think on the downside. No. The biggest troubles come on this side. Why? Because growth is going to stop. For sure. The way growth stops is when the forces which are against growth equal the forces that are pushing growth. When they become equal, growth stops and then goes down. The forces pushing for growth are strongest now. Read the paper. What is Merkel trying to do? She's trying to solve all your problems with growth. Obama is trying to solve all of our problems with growth. The banks are trying to solve their problems with growth. Even now we try to solve the problem of climate change with growth. Why? So we have more resources for climate. I mean, so now is the time when the forces pushing growth are strongest. Therefore, now is the time when the negative pressures have to be strongest. And those negative pressures, they are climate change, epidemics, they are all those things which we think are big problems. They will be strongest now. We said that if we don't make big changes, then this will be the result. If we do make changes, we could attain something like this. Here I'm showing 5 factors from the model. In the model actually were several hundred factors, but here I have non-renewable resources. That's copper marble and silver and oil and so forth. This is total Bevölkerung, population. This is GDP, industrial output per person. This is pollution, persistent pollution, chemicals and radioactivity and such stuff. And so we said, that's the choice. And then, of course, the politicians said, well, we picked this one. We won't change our policies, but we will get this one. And, for example, in the Brundtland report, they started to talk about sustainable development. This is the normal, old definition of sustainable development. The politicians love this definition. Why? It says that you can have everything you want, and then in the future they can have everything they want. So it's not necessary to make any big choices. That's why the politicians are so happy about this. But this isn't going to work anymore. This is an old definition, and we need to come up with a new way of understanding sustainable development. So that's what I will talk about today. Here's my main ideas. In 1972, there were, in theory, two possible futures for the globe. Overshoot and sustainable development, I showed you. We didn't change our policies, so we stayed on the overshoot path. So long that now the old idea of sustainable development is no longer possible. We have to change our way of understanding it, and I mentioned 4 ways. Focus on universal instead of global problems. Don't worry, I will define all of these terms. Also, don't write this down because I give you the slides. You can just have the pictures if you want them. So don't bother to try to make copies. We have to focus on cultural and social side rather than technical and economic. We have to start thinking about resilience of the systems. And we need to quit talking about these things and start doing something about them. Those are the main ideas. Now, I'm going to be giving you some new ideas today, some new conclusions. And I want you to think about this process. There are 2 ways that people get the conclusions or the ideas that they have about the future. One way is you identify the important factors, and then you gather data about these factors, and then you decide what conclusions are justified. If the data or the factors change, then you have to change your conclusions. That's one way. There's a second way. You start by thinking, what conclusions do you like? Then you find the factors which justify these conclusions, and then you find some data which legitimate or show that these factors are useful. For the second way, if you get new data or new factors, you don't change your conclusions. You just get new data and new factors. We see this now in the United States with climate change. On the one side, we have scientists who are studying sea level rise and dynamics of the atmosphere and so forth, and slowly they come to a conclusion about the future of climate change. On the other hand, we have, let's say, politicians. They know that climate change is not an acceptable idea. They don't accept it. And so they look around for reasons that they can not accept climate change. And you see, I give you a brief conversation to illustrate. So on the climate skeptic side, we have, let's say, Oklahoma Senator Inouye. He's a, unfortunately, old, powerful guy in Washington, D.C., and he doesn't believe in climate change. And on the other side, we have, let's say, Jim Hansen, who's a scientist working for NASA, and he's studying climate change. And so Jim Hansen says there's climate change, and Inouye says, no, I don't accept there's climate change. And why? The glaciers are getting bigger all around the world. The glaciers are getting bigger, says Inouye. Therefore, clearly no climate change. Then some of Hansen's colleagues, they study the glaciers, and they say, no, actually the glaciers are getting smaller. And then Inouye says, I mean, I don't make this up, this happens. Then Inouye says, well, I don't actually care about glaciers. I'm really interested in polar bears, ice bear. And they are doing fine, so I don't believe in climate change. And then the scientists, they study the polar bear, and they say, no, actually, the polar bears are having a terrible time. They don't get any food. They are drowning because there's no ice anymore. It's a terrible time for them. And then Inoue says, actually, I don't really care about the polar bears. I don't believe in climate change because, now it's the new factor, because more ice is in the Antarctic. Now the Antarctic has more ice than before, therefore, obviously, no climate change. Actually, we did now study the ice in the Antarctic, and we understand why it's getting bigger with climate change. The reason is because climate change comes, the ice starts to break up into pieces, and the wind blows these pieces over against Antarctic, so it looks bigger, but it's because of climate change. But you see, there's no way for Inoue and Hansen to agree about climate change. I know about this difference for two reasons. So first, I'm married to a woman who decides first what is the acceptable conclusion and then figures out why that's the best idea. It's a big challenge for us, both of us. I mean, I love her very much, and if she wants to do something, I'm happy to do it, but typically I will say, why? And then she will tell me, and I say, well, actually, no, not true. She will say, it's cheaper, or it's whatever. And then she says, well, actually, I don't care about cheaper. I want to do this, and then she gives me another reason. So finally, we just do it. We just do it. Also, I know about this because for 40 years I have been talking about limits to growth. And the politicians say, no, limits to growth is not acceptable. I don't believe in limits to growth because resources are getting cheaper. Then we do the research, etc. So there it goes. I have two ways. Please notice that one way is not better than the other way. Actually, very often I find my wife has a better idea than I do, even though she doesn't know why. So it doesn't mean necessarily that the scientific way is better than the intuitive way, just that there's just two different ways. And you need to be clear about it and how do you operate. In this room, some people will be what I loosely call scientific, and some will be intuitive. It's not better to be one way or the other, but you just need to realize that there's two different types of discourse. Just for this lecture today, I want you to try being scientific, to be open-minded. It means you need to get some new habits about how you pay attention to information and ideas. And so I'm going to give you a little practice with habits first, just to get you into the idea, and then I give my lecture. So, everyone cross your arms. Look down and see which wrist is on top. And remember, I give you a hint. It's either your left or your right. Okay, so you remember, drop your arms. Perfect. Now, please cross your arms. And look down and see which wrist is on top. And remember, okay? Drop your arms. Now, since I'm a scientist, I'm going to gather some data. How many people had the same wrist up both times? Raise your hand. Me too. Almost everybody. I think it must mean there's some optimum technique. So let's see, what is the optimum technique? Everyone who had the left wrist up both times, raise your hand. So I did. Everyone who had the right wrist up both times, raise your hand. Oh, so this is interesting, you see? Half and half. Everybody does it the same way each time, but half do it one way, half do it another. This is what you expect with a habit. Why do you cross your arms? You cross your arms because you need to do something that doesn't need your arms. And if every time you have a problem which doesn't need your arms, you have to spend 10 minutes thinking, you know, what am I going to do with my arms? It's not very efficient. So you develop a habit, cross your arms. Then you can, go ahead. And it works very good. I mean, it's a fantastic habit. And actually, you know, we have many habits in life. We have habits about our consumption. We have habits about the way we use energy. We have habits about how big a house we want to have. We have habits, so many habits. And they work. I mean, you know, look, here we are. This is fantastic to be here. But sometimes the conditions change, and then you need to have new habits. So I'm going to give you practice. Cross your arms the other way. Good. Now, this shows three things which I want you to remember about my speech. First thing, it's not so easy to make a new habit. You have to think about it and maybe make some mistakes at first. So don't imagine that my lecture is going to be easy for you. Number two, it doesn't feel so comfortable. It's not so pleasant to do it the different way. So I'm going to, my ideas aren't going to be very comfortable for you. But three, you were able finally to cross your arms the other way. Most of you. And you will be able to use these ideas which I give you. Most of you, I hope. Okay. So I told you that we said if we don't change, if we don't slow things down, it's going to be a big problem. Let's see what happened. This is global population. Here is 1972 when we wrote our book, 3.65 million Mensch. Now it's over 7. You can see our book really had enormous impact on the growth rate of the global population. Nothing. 0. Not only population, also industry. Here is data on the global use of metals for all purposes. Here is 1972 where we wrote our book. We said have to slow down, and you can see it really didn't slow down. Now twice as much. In 1972, when we wrote our book, our ideas about overshoot and equilibrium and limits were very theoretical because there wasn't much in real life to see except just growth, 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 everybody doing growth. But in the 1990s, many scientists began to study different issues, and they often would write reports which say basically, for fish or for animals or for forests, if we don't make a big change, it's going to be very difficult. I don't know about Germany, but in the United States, a very typical 100 Nobel Prize winners sign a document which says, if we don't change, it's going to be a serious problem. And then one economist says, oh, it's no problem. And then the newspaper says, still a big debate about if it's a problem or no problem. Now, we don't only look at scientific studies, we start to look at the global data. In the year 2000, so 12 years ago, scientists at the Australian National Research Institute, CSIRO, did a study. They took our equilibrium run and our overshoot run, and they looked at 4 curves: population, resources, pollution, and industry. And then they gathered data for the globe to see how is the globe going? Is it going more on the sustainable path or more on the overshoot path? And this is their graph. So 4 variables from 1900 up to 2100, 19, 21, etc. And the population, industrial output, non-renewable resources, and persistent pollution. The green curve is taken from our overshoot scenario, and the blue curve is taken from the equilibrium scenario, and the purple dots are historical data. So you see, history obviously is so far on the overshoot path. This was done in 2000, and then again 10 years later, so 2010, they added 10 more years of data. Now they have 40 years of data, and same thing. This doesn't prove, of course, anything, and only when we reach the turning point and start to see coming down, then I start to think maybe this is solved, because it's so simple to put points on an exponential curve. I don't need 300 equation model to do that. I can do that with one equation. But the turning point, no, that's different. And also we see this in a real situation. Here are data gathered by an institute in Belgium about natural disasters and catastrophes from 1900 up until now, 2010. And you can see slowly going up. Tsunamis, Fukushima, and of course Sandy and Fukushima so far aren't on this curve. And it's not just now. If we look ahead, for sure, it will get more. Just as one example, take climate change. If we stop today putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the climate will still change for centuries. As the air gets warmer, more water evaporates from the ocean and from the lakes and the rivers. So that moisture has to come down. So there will be, with climate change, more snow and more rain. But the thing is that there start to be more extremes. So some areas become more dry and some areas become more wet. We don't know, of course, precisely how this will be, but computer models start now to give us an image of it. This is a computer model of precipitation, rainfall patterns for the period 2030 to 2039, so it's only 18 years from now. The dark is more dry and the green is more wet. I got this map. I didn't make this map. I got it from the web because I was in Moscow and I was trying to get the Russians to be worried about climate change. Oh, no way. But I said to them, you have two choices. Either you start to worry about climate change or you start to learn Chinese. Because this area in China grows 65% of all the grain in China. And this area is going to become very difficult for agriculture. So what do you suppose when all these Chinese look up into this empty area here, which is getting a lot more rainfall? They are already moving north. But then I noticed, I better start learning Spanish. Because Mexico becomes essentially impossible for agriculture. And although I live over here, if they just go north, it's not any better. So they're certainly going to come east. This is, just think about this. 65% of the agricultural productive grain area of China becomes difficult or impossible for agriculture in the next 18 years. So that's just one thing. I don't speak about energy or other things. So it just shows that these curves are going to become more and more. This Sandy and the big drought in the United States, they aren't something temporary. They're just the beginning. So we need to redefine what our possibilities are. We took this Brundtland definition of sustainability, and if you now see the way people use it, the way Obama or Merkel or people use this term, there's some assumptions in it. So one assumption, the rich keep what they have, and maybe even get a bit more. You know, I know when Obama stands up and talks about sustainable development, he isn't telling us that we have to have less. So that's one assumption. But of course, the poor will come up. I mean, it's only fair that the poor should have as much as we do. Even last night, someone said to me, how can you stop growth before the poor have enough? It's not fair. I agree, it's not fair. So we assume they come up. And we assume this is going to happen inside the same system, same politics, same economics, same industry. Only we just have to make, you know, feed in tariffs for solar and put a little tax on carbon dioxide and a couple things. You might ask, how could this happen? Well, it's easy. We're going to develop new technologies which decouple, that means disconnect between GDP and emissions. So we will have a magic situation where the GDP keeps going up, but the energy use and environmental damage starts going down. Absolute decoupling. I can tell you there is absolutely no scientific evidence that this is possible, and actually a good deal of evidence that it isn't possible. You can have relative decoupling. It means GDP goes up and energy doesn't go up as fast. But the idea that GDP goes up and energy goes down, that's a fantasy, just a fantasy. And how are we going to do this technology? Oh, that's easy, we assume. We'll have more growth, and the growth will give us more resources, and then we can use these resources to deal with all of this. And in fact, you see, that's what we're doing. I mean, in the United States, you know, it's more fun in the United States to read about the financial problems of Europe than to read about the problems of the United States, even though our problems are bigger than your problems. We like to read about your problems. We don't like to read about our problems. And when we read about your problems, we see that your leaders are going around trying to see how to stimulate growth. This is from the New York Times just before I came over here. It was in the main paper. But this policy isn't going to work anymore. Growth doesn't give you sustainable development. It gives you growth. And we have already too much growth. This question, what is the sustainable level for the globe? How many people can be on the globe? How much consumption can be on the globe? Is a very difficult scientific question. There are so many things we don't know, and both about the present and about the future. But the best effort, the best idea about this is this so-called global ecological footprint, which a concept developed by Matthias Wackernagel, a Swiss scientist. Using his numbers, you see, one means that you are using as many energy and resources as the globe is able to produce year after year. That's what we did for the first 200,000 years that we were on this planet. It's only in the last 150 years that we use more in some areas. So in 1972, when we wrote the first book, we were here about 90% of sustainable levels. So it was at that time, in theory, possible to slow down and come into equilibrium. But we didn't. So now we are about 1.6 and increasing faster and faster. So one component of this is CO2. Last year we put more CO2 into the atmosphere than ever before, probably ever before in human history, certainly ever before when we were studying it. Now it's not possible to slow down and stay there. We have to come back down. The examples of, I apologize, it's a very simple, stupid example, but we are really now something like flying on an airplane high in the sky, and we understand that the gas is going to run out. When the gas runs out, the plane will come to the ground. For sure, no argument about that. But we have a choice. While we still have gasoline, we can look around for a good place to land, and we can bring the plane in a peaceful way. Probably we won't be exactly where we want it to be, but we'll be safe. Or we can hope something is going to happen and imagine there will be technological advance so that our airplane doesn't need gas or something, and then we just stay high, and then of course we run out of gas, and then you come down in a very bad way. This is our choice. We still have relatively good possibilities, but only if we plan ahead. How to do that? Well, I'm going to suggest that if we redefine sustainable development, it can start to give us some possibility for doing this. How to do that? Well, first focus on universal problems instead of global problems. Again, I will define everything. Focus on cultural and social changes, not only on technology. Focus on making our systems more resilient and forget about our old ideas of sustainable development. And secondly, start really taking action. So now let me talk about these. Global versus universal. There are many problems that affect everybody. Water scarcity, spread of nuclear weapons, possibility of epidemics, climate change, and so forth. I find it's very useful to divide them into two categories: global problems and universal problems. Global problems affect everybody, but they can only be solved by everybody acting together. So climate change is a global problem. No way that Hamburg can solve global climate change unless also Beijing and Tokyo and Washington, D.C. and New York, etc. also do it. No way that you can solve the spread of nuclear weapons. No way you can protect yourself against global diseases by yourself. Those are global problems. Universal problems affect everybody, but you can work on them here, and if you are successful, you get the benefits here, and you don't have to wait for Beijing and America and so forth to do it. So air pollution, water pollution, traffic, some aspects of energy conservation. These are universal problems. You pay here now, and you get the benefits here soon. That's politically quite attractive. The global problems, you pay here now, and over there, much later, come the benefits. No politician is going to try to get reelected by telling you that you have to pay now and somebody else is going to get the benefits later. That's politically unfortunate, and also in the market, not interesting. Now, we have to solve both problems, of course, finally, but if I'm a teacher, I tell my students, start on the universal problems. It's psychologically very satisfying. You learn quickly that you're making mistakes because the results are quite quick, and you build up confidence, and then later you can start to work on the global problems. So I think that's one of the first. I'll give you just an example. The good news is that population growth rates are coming down in most European countries and Japan. The bad news is every corporate and political leader is fighting against this. I mean, if sustainable development means anything, it means stable population. We should be happy the population is coming down. We tell the poor countries that they should reduce their population growth rate. So we should be very happy when it happens here, but no, we don't. Why? Well, because when the population growth rate goes down, the labor force goes down. These are the trends for Germany. It's a, you know, this is happening in these days. The labor force starts to go down. And when the labor force goes down, GNP goes down. There's no way to substitute with many robots to have the same GNP growth. Of course, the GNP per person can still go up because your population is going down, your GNP goes down slower, you can still have GNP per person going up, but you can't have total GNP going up. And when your GNP starts to go down, this causes psychological problems for the corporate leaders. It has some implications for the stock market, and it bankrupts your social security system. All debts start to be not paid, which we see already. Now, it's no accident that Greece and American pension systems start to cancel their debts. They can't pay without growth. We can solve these problems. These are universal problems. You can develop a new social security system here in Germany without waiting for the Japanese or the Chinese to develop one. You know, so there are things to do here. It needs really different system. I give you a quick example. See now, if you have parents, old parents, who don't work and who need help, the state should pay. That's the notion of the Social Security system. But now it's going to be impossible for the state to pay because there will be too many old people and too few young people. So we need something different. In Japan, they start to experiment with an interesting system. Let's say that you have parents living in Munich and you live in Hamburg. In Munich is some young person. Their parents live up here in Hamburg, and you don't know each other. But your parents, the ones living in Hamburg, can have some coupons. Let's say 2 hours of coupons. And they can ask some young person in Munich to do something, to shovel snow from the sidewalk or to go get groceries or whatever the old people need. And when somebody does it, then the old people give the coupons. Then that young person can mail the coupons up here to his parents. And then his parents can use the coupons to buy something. In a way, that person down there does 2 hours of labor for his parents, but not being in the same city. No money involved, and it works. So, I mean, you see, I don't recommend precisely this system, but just to show there are really totally different ways to take care of the Social Security system, and we need now to start thinking that. It's a universal problem. And actually, falling GDP is not such a big problem. You know, Germany had fantastic growth in GDP in the period from 1970 to 2011. What do you suppose happened to the happiness of the German people during this period? Little difficult to tell, but as far as we have any good data, it's going down. So, you know, I mean, that means that we shouldn't automatically be worried about falling GNP. Maybe we would be happier if we figure out. Now, GNP can go down under control or out of control. If it goes down out of control, we won't like it for sure. But if it goes down under our control, it could be better. Next thing we have to do, focus on social and cultural changes. So I'm running out of time. I apologize. I'm going to skip over some data. I'm going to just show you the main, this is energy. I'm talking about energy here. The interesting thing about energy is, globally, 1/3 of energy comes from oil. But in some sectors, transport, pharmaceuticals, agricultural chemicals, it's almost 100%. Oil production is now starting to fall. So energy is going to go down, and it will have a big impact on certain sectors. This shows global oil production, 2001 up to now. about 2005, it stopped growing. We're now on a so-called plateau, and the best research is that 20 years from now, it will be half current levels. It will go down by 50%. That's according to a German think tank analysis. And we need to deal with that. I mean, one of the rules is if you don't have something, you can't use it. If you don't have energy, then you can't use the energy. And energy use, this is not some crazy idea. Most of the institutions in society now, which look far out, the military, the big reinsurance groups, Munich Re, for example, they start to understand this. This is a quote from a United States 20-year forecast, unclassified report. And this is a headline from a recent Science magazine. So, I mean, it's understood. The peak is here. Now, what to do about it? Well, energy use is depending on 4 factors. Number of people, the amount of capital that each person has, so cars, refrigerators, houses, so forth, service capital like this auditorium, etc. How much energy does it require to operate the capital? Because, of course, if you can't put gas in your car, the car is not very useful. If you can't put electricity into the lights, a light bulb is not very useful. You need energy to operate the capital. So that's the third factor. And then the last one is how much of that energy is coming from fossil fuels. If this is going to go down, something in here is going to go down. So far, we worked very hard on energy efficiency. Passive houses, Prius automobiles, energy efficient refrigerators, and so forth. And in Germany especially, you work very hard on renewable energy, windmills, photovoltaics. This is getting more power without fossil fuels. But you ignore this. And what it means, and I can tell you, here you will not be able to accomplish enough to deal with this. So either the number of people is going to go down, or the amount of capital per person is going to go down. These are the social factors. And in order to have a relatively nice future, we need to start thinking about this. If we don't think about it, it will happen anyway, but in ways that we don't like. So keep doing technology, but also social. Third thing, make the system more resilient. Well, it's now starting to be understood that we're moving into a very interesting time. This was the front page on the Wall Street Journal, which is a leading financial newspaper in the United States. Volatility. I don't know exactly how you say it. Do you know you say volatilitat? Yeah, whatever. So anyway, you understand. And so, I mean, this is it. This is coming. And it will be like this for the rest of your life. I mean, this isn't going to be like 2 years. This is now a new phase of our society. I have said many times, and I was saying actually already in the 90s, looking at my computer model, I could say, in the next 30 years, you will see more change than you saw in the last 100. I don't know exactly when and exactly what, but just looking at the pressures, I see that these changes are coming. And now we see them. You know, we had a storm, biggest in history, which destroyed much of southern New York City. I mean, amazing storm. Now we have a drought in the United States. It's getting worse. You don't hear about it because everybody was talking about Sandy, but the drought is actually getting worse. It affects 80% of the agricultural area of the United States. And if this drought continues for a few more weeks, it will start to damage the winter wheat production. And then next summer, your food prices will go up really high all around the globe. And when food prices go up, you get social riots, like in the Arab Spring. Arab Spring riots absolutely were connected in part with increased food prices. You know, they had those dictators for years. Why suddenly last spring they started to riot? Because the dictators were combined with the food price rises. You know, the United States bought the biggest car company in the United States. The Eurozone is breaking up. I don't talk about that, but there's absolutely no way that Greece is going to stay inside the current Eurozone, for sure. Merkel is just trying to delay until after the next election to deal with it. And that makes it only more difficult, of course. I mean, we understand this. And the financial collapse of the 2000, I mean, so we're in this period now. That's what it's going to be like. And we need to understand that and prepare for it, which means we need to start thinking about resilience. Resilience is the ability to absorb a shock or a surprise and quickly come back performing the essential functions. I don't say come back to the same form or the same appearance, but at least to provide the essential functions. So, for example, in New York, the subway system was not resilient. It absorbed a shock and it didn't come back. Even still today, some parts of the subway system don't work because of the water that came in. It wasn't resilient. We need to make these things more resilient. If we say if a system continues to perform, even with a shock, it's stable. There are ways to make systems more stable. And if it quits performing briefly, but then starts to perform again, we say it's flexible. The ideas of resilience have been quite well developed in three areas. Personal resilience. If you lose your job or you lose your partner, do you commit suicide or start drinking, or do you adapt and keep going? Are you resilient or you're not resilient? There are many psychologists and psychiatrists who are interested in this issue. They have professional conferences. There's literature, there's journals about personal resilience. Ecological resilience. If you dump chemicals into a swamp and kill everything, does the swamp come back with biodiversity, or it stays dead? Or a forest, or agricultural soils. So this is ecosystem resilience. Again, many professionals, many journals, many meetings, quite different. They don't talk, these two groups. And then the third is disaster resilience. So in Japan, resilience to earthquakes is a big issue. When there's an earthquake, how quickly the city can again provide power and water and food and so forth. And we need now to take these three areas and build on them until we have really a sense of social resilience, economic resilience. It's important because there has been a strong push to make things more efficient. Efficiency is a ratio of output over input. You sell the output, you pay for the input. So if you can become more efficient, the difference between what you sell and what you pay goes up, you make more profit. So companies are very interested in efficiency. Also politicians, they like to spend money in a way which produces the output soon before the next election, not later. So a strong push to increase short-term obvious results. Unfortunately, there's a trade-off between efficiency and resilience. This is efficiency, short-term results, and this is resilience. And if you maximize the efficiency, then the resilience is going to be quite low. Inversely, if you don't have much efficiency, you can have fairly high resilience. A rock, very resilient. No output, but very resilient. Not very efficient, but totally resilient. Just-in-time manufacturing, developed by the Japanese to eliminate inventories, very efficient, but not resilient. You know, the Japanese car companies became the most efficient in the world, and everybody, certainly in United States had to do the same thing because you couldn't compete. So what does just-in-time manufacturing is where you organize so that a car is coming down, and just when it needs a door, a truck comes to the back of the factory with that door, and you stick it in. No inventories, very efficient. But of course, if the factory which makes the doors is destroyed, then you don't produce any cars. And this is what happened, of course. When Fukushima came, some of the world's most efficient factories were destroyed. And then suddenly, all around the world, you couldn't make certain things. Or in Thailand, when the floods came, some of the world's most efficient computer hard drive factories were destroyed. And then all around the world, you couldn't so easily make computers anymore. So, trade-off between efficiency and resilience. And now in Japan, in the corporate Aufsichtsraten, they start now to say how to become more resilient. You can come over here, you don't lose so much efficiency, and you gain quite a bit of resilience. So that's how. And we need to do this also with our social systems. It's important because at the individual level, if you make your house or your family or your town more resilient, it means that you won't have so many difficulties in the future. At the social or societal or national level, it means that democracy is going to be more stable. You see, if you aren't resilient and shocks come, which they will come, it's chaos. And when you have chaos, always some guy will stand up and say, give me power and I take care of it. And when people have to choose between order and liberty, they always choose order. Always. In the United States now, we're losing a lot of our liberty because of the 9/11 terrorist attack. In order to make sure such a terrorist attack doesn't happen again in the future, we're giving up all sorts of liberty in the United States. So it's just a human nature. And in order to protect democracy, we really need to make our systems more resilient. So when the shock comes and the guy stands up and says, change your constitution and I promise it doesn't happen, we can say, well, no, don't worry, it's okay. Not a big problem for us. Okay. Well, it's time to quit, and so I just give you quickly the fourth main idea, and that's about action. So again, I'm going to do a very quick little exercise. I'm going to show you how to take an action. It's a very simple one, just to clap your hands. Now, I don't do this to get applause. I know this really has an important meaning. We'll do it in the following way. I'm going to count to 3, slowly. 1, 2, 3. Then I say, clap, klopfen, I'll say that word. And precisely when I say that word, everybody claps, okay? So, if we're successful, outside, there will be just one big noise. So it's so simple. I count to 3, then I say clap, and precisely, just exactly at that moment when I say clap, you all clap your hands. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, clap. This actually is a very, very important lesson. You understood what I told you to do. You wanted to do it. I mean, you really did want to do it, right? But as soon as my actions were different from my words, you were paying attention to my actions and you forgot my words. And that's the same thing with sustainable development. If we just go out there and start talking about sustainable development, but we keep acting like overshoot and collapse, guess what we're going to get? Action, not words. Thank you.
das hier anzumachen? Es geht. Ja, vielen Dank. Ja, gibt es Fragen, Anmerkungen? Genieren Sie sich nicht, genau. Ja, bitte.
Thanks for the speech. I would like to ask you, what do you think, what kind of system or what kind of society would be better to achieve the goal of resilience? One which is rather based on competition, or one which is more based on cooperation? Thanks.
So this question, what kind of a system, cooperative or competitive, is more likely to give resilience? I will say something about this, but let me first of all remind you, 40 years ago I built a computer model, and with my colleagues I wrote a book about limits to growth. The fact that we still remember this book 40 years later doesn't mean that I can just answer all of these questions. I mean, in many of these questions, I don't know the answer. But now I'll say something. I mean, I'm a professor. Professors have to say something, you know. So I think, so this is a dimension. This is a spectrum between competitive and cooperative. I don't think, when I'm thinking about resilience, I don't think that's the correct dimension. It's not totally irrelevant, but it's not the main dimension. I think a better dimension is the size of the system. Big systems, like the global financial system, tend to be brittle. They tend to be very unresilient. Usually, resilience we see on smaller scales. So, for example, now there's this so-called transition town movement, where people are all around the world in small towns starting to think what to do about climate change and energy and so forth. They try to make their systems more resilient. Making something resilient means you have to typically pay costs now and you get the benefit later. Of course, when we make something resilient, we hope actually the shock won't happen. You know, when I buy insurance for my house against fire, actually I hope the fire won't happen. So for me, the best thing is I pay and I actually don't get any benefit from it. But this possibility for a group to decide that they will collectively pay something now in order to get some or maybe no benefits later can happen at a small scale, but as soon as you get a very big scale, it doesn't happen. And also, another dimension is this question of time horizon. How long ahead do you think? If people move their place very often, they tend to have a short time horizon vis-a-vis their home. You know, in my town we have this problem. We have an excellent school system, very expensive, but it's excellent. So people, families, they move in, they put their kids into school, and then when the kids are finished, they move out. Well, I pay taxes, you know, if you don't have kids in school, they think. And then we say, okay, now we want to build a new building. And they say, oh no, it's too expensive. They know that they don't get any benefit from that building because they have a very short-term horizon. So, time horizon, size, these are the things which start to have an influence on resilience. And then you get off into some of the social factors, trust, love even. You know, if you have a group of people who trust each other, then it's more easy for them to make the sacrifices necessary to have a resilient system. If nobody trusts another person, you know, then they don't do it. So it's those things. All else equal, I generally think that cooperation is better than competition. On the other hand, competition is a fantastic source of energy. When I build educational games, not these little ones, but big ones, I use competition as a positive energy source, to get people really to be excited, to understand, and to win. So competition is not bad, unless, let's say not always bad. Sometimes, of course, it gets off into violence and so forth. But anyway, those are my thoughts about competition and cooperation. Another question.
As a young teacher, I started to teach, and I started with your book, so I picked up one of the old copies. Most of the graphs, the curves that you made, go up in a exponential way. Now, most of them we saw only linear. Do you think this is a success of your life and of your work? And how do you see your last 40 years? I mean, you made a good career on this work, that's good. But are you satisfied with what you achieved?
Okay. No. I'm not satisfied. I mean, I'm not happy about it. So, that's the answer. I showed the curves. I mean, limits had really no visible influence. Does Merkel, when there's a Greek crisis, does Merkel talk about resilience? Does she talk about sustainability? No, she's going off to talk about how to get growth, more growth. Same thing for Obama, same thing in China. China is trying to solve all of its problems with growth. No, we're still, it's so interesting. This reminds me, this fact, that you keep trying to use growth. I once was in India, and some tourist came and was talking to a local Indian, and they didn't speak the same language. So this person said something, and the Indian didn't understand. So the person just said it louder. Had, of course, absolutely no benefit. And pushing, pushing growth now doesn't work, so we do it more. And it's not working. I think, for reasons which I didn't describe here, that the kind of growth which we had in the 80s and the 90s of the last century will never come again. Never. It has to do with energy, the use of energy, the fact that energy, etc. So we just, instead of continuing to push the old button, which doesn't work anymore, we need to start looking around and do something different. But I'm not going to be the one who achieves that. I put in 40 years. That's it for me. Somebody else can do the next 40 years.
Yes, I was wondering about your comment on Greece. Because what if the European people are just intuitive on that part and start off with the conclusion that it's not acceptable to put Greece out of the European Union? So what's your prognosis? What would happen in future then?
I'm sorry, I didn't exactly. Are you talking about Greece or greed?
Greece.
Greece, the country of Greece.
Yes.
Well, this really gets me into a area where I probably don't know more than you know. But you know what you know, and you don't know what I know. So I'll tell you what I know, and then I'm very interested in currency systems, financial systems. I think we aren't able to achieve sustainable development with the current financial system that we have, because the financial system is absolutely based on the assumption of growth. When you create new money, with the current system, in Russia, in Japan, in the United States, in Germany, to create new money, you lend it into existence. You make a loan. And that loan comes with an interest rate, which means that to pay the debt back needs more than what you got. It's absolutely based on the assumption that there will be growth to permit you to pay it back. It's so interesting. We have a financial system where, let's say I have $1,000 or 1,000 euros. I take it, I put it over in the bank, and I don't do anything with it. And then and I come back a year later, it should be bigger. But if I take energy or copper or my house or anything else and put it there and don't do anything with it, it's actually getting worse. We're trying to manage a system which is dominated by negative feedback loops using a system which is dominated by positive feedback loops. It's worked for a while, but it's coming to an end, and soon. The financial system is just becoming crazy. I give you two examples. One of the major ways the economic system works is that companies sell stock, Aktien, and then they use the money to do something. So I'm looking around, and the idea is the good companies can sell stock and the bad companies can't sell stock. So it's a control system. In 1970, the average length of time that somebody held stock was 7 years. If you buy a stock in some company, on average, you hold it 7 years before you sell it. Now, 7 seconds. Because of flash trading. The computers, they're just, selling hundreds of millions of shares all the time. So of course, if you hold stock for 7 seconds or 7 minutes, you don't care about the quality of the management. You don't care about the efficiency of energy use in the company. It's nothing to do with it anymore. So that system is finished. Another big economic system we have is foreign exchange trading. I mean, one of the basic control mechanisms in our global society is that if somebody does poorly, then their currency should become worth less. They depreciate. And that's the adjustment mechanism. That's why now Greece is such a problem, because they are locked into a fixed exchange rate. If in the old days, the drachma would just go down and the Greeks would suffer, but basically, the system would maintain equilibrium. Now they aren't able to do that. And so you have a problem. But there's still a big industry trading yen for dollars, for euros, for rubles, and so forth. Actually, the volume of transactions, the value of the transactions on the international foreign exchange markets, 14 times the annual global GDP. 14 times. So every year, 14 times as much money is traded on the foreign exchange as is produced by all of the countries of the world producing goods and services. In 1990, 70% of the foreign exchange transactions were made for trade. I wanted to buy a Mercedes, so I would go and take some dollars and I would get D-mark, and then the D-marks I would use to buy the Mercedes. So that 70%, and 30% was gambling. Now, 3% is for trade, 97% is for gambling. So, I mean, these are not systems which are serving our purposes anymore. They are systems which are just, they've gone crazy. And what they do is they're designed to make a few people incredibly rich and many other people somewhat poor. I mean, that's what they do. They don't anymore control the relationship between human beings and resources and so forth. So the financial system is really interesting, and actually one of the ways to make things more resilient is to create parallel currency systems. There are thousands of them around the world now where people, they use the regular currency, but then they create Berkshire bucks is in the Berkshire Mountains or Albany time dollars, or many things. Frequent flyer miles, actually, from airlines are a parallel currency system. The biggest one, in fact. So, I mean, by creating these parallel systems, you can increase the resilience of the system. The biggest complementary currency system in Europe is in Switzerland. Billions of euros a year are traded, mainly on a computer, amongst companies. They use it as a way of facilitating the exchange of goods and services between companies. And that's probably one of the reasons why in the 2008 crisis, Switzerland didn't suffer so much, because its companies didn't suddenly find that they couldn't get working capital to carry on their business, because they still had this parallel system. And when I'm talking to people in transition town movement or others, I'm always giving strong encouragement to develop new kinds of currency systems. Now, what's going to happen to Greece? I hoped you would forget your question, but because we've locked Greece into fixed exchange rates with all of the other Eurozone countries, we've really created a system where over the long term you have a choice. If you want to have a uniform currency, you're going to have uniform people, uniform work habits, uniform consumption habits, and so forth. Personally, I think that would be terrible. I have spent a lot of time in Greece. I enjoyed it very much. It's big. Why? Because it's different. But if you want to have different kinds of people, then you need to have different kinds of currency systems. You can't have different kinds of people and a uniform currency. Actually, when the euro was created, it was created for political reasons, not out of any idea about designing a stable currency system. Remember, I told you at the beginning 2 ways to form conclusions. The people who concluded that the euro would be a viable currency were operating intuitively. It wasn't acceptable to them, I mean, of course, the driving force has always been war. I mean, to make Europe safe from war again. And one way was to bind everybody together with currency. So they wanted to do that, so they just didn't pay any attention to all of the criticisms. But already at the beginning, economists and others looked at the euro system and said, it won't work. It will fail, and it will fail. It always takes longer than you think. I mean, it's one of the rules which I did. I have learned some things in 40 years, and one of the things I learned is it always takes longer than you think for things to happen. And so I don't know exactly when, but I would say within 3 or 4 years, either Greece and maybe Italy and a few others will be outside of the Eurozone, or the euro will be something totally different from today. It will be some really different kind of institutional, political, economic mechanism than it is today, because the current euro system is simply not consistent with the current European population. So I think that's what I think about Greece. Incidentally, I met last night with 30 investment officers here in Hamburg, and I said, what do you think about Greece and the euro? And they all said, oh, absolutely no problem. We're going to find some way that this works just fine. So you should just know that everyone doesn't agree with me.
Okay. Is it possible?
Some of you, of course, have to leave. Leave. It's no problem. I don't mind if you leave. I won't be insulted. Just get up and leave. And if some others want to stay, that's fine. I'm happy to stay. But you shouldn't sit there wishing you could leave. Just leave.
Yeah. Is it possible to improve the given economic system, the global economic system, to attain global sustainable development, or do we need a revolution to create something completely different?
So the question is, could we imagine to change the current system to get sustainable development, or is it going to be really different? It's going to be really different. We're not going to make changes ahead of time. I mean, if we even can't deal with climate change, for sure, we're not going to deal with the economic system. So we will continue to do what we're doing now, having big summit meetings, how to keep things going, and then finally at a certain moment it will just crash. And then it will go in some other way. I mean, we will still be here. humans have been on this planet for 200,000 years. They'll be here for another 200,000 years, but it won't look just like this. I mean, but most of the time it didn't look like this in the past, and most of the time it won't look like this in the future. I mean, you know, that's the way it is. It's no reason to be pessimistic about that. You just have to be historically sophisticated.
You suggested focusing on universal rather than global problems, on cultural, social change, and resilience and action. And as a member of the local transition town in Hamburg here, I wonder if you have some advices considering priorities for realizing certain projects. I mean, you were already mentioning local currencies, but I'd like you to hear you elaborate a little bit more on things you may have in mind.
So, I mean, the question is, I recommended to focus on universal instead of global problems, and I recommended to focus on social rather than technical problems. And so you asked me, what are my concrete suggestions? I don't have general recommendations because I'm interested not in the theory of solving these problems, but in the practice of solving the problems. In theory, I have all sorts of ideas, but in practice, it depends. Who are you? What resources do you have? How many hours a day do you want to work? You know, does your wife support you, or she's criticized? I mean, there's so many details that you need to know before making recommendations. This morning I had an interview with some person, and he said, he's a German guy, actually English guy living in Hamburg. He said, so I'm going to take now a Master's of Science. What should I study? And I said, I need at least an hour talking with you before I could make a recommendation about that. I mean, that's a big decision, and it depends on many things, and it's not one answer the same for everybody. Same for you. I mentioned currencies. I told you what I think is going to happen with energy. Climate clearly is now in a period of rapid change. So I mean, these are the backdrop. But what specifically what to do? You know, it depends. How many people are you? Do you live in the country, or you live in some apartment building? I mean, you know, there's all these details. These problems have to be solved where you are. You know, my mother taught me many important lessons. One lesson was when you play cards, when you play a game of Spielkarten, concentrate on the cards you have and how to use them rather than sitting there wishing that you had other cards. And it's the same with you. I mean, so we would have to see what do you have, and then we could figure it out.
Thank you.
If it is all about changing and or change of thinking and change of habits, do you count on the new media, the digital media, the Web 2.0 media? Do you count on the new media, the Web 2.0 media, that they have a big role and impact for changing habits of masses of people?
So it's a question about the media, especially new media or just media generally?
Social media.
Okay, social media. And whether this is going to change our habits. So I have to absolutely to say that I'm very biased by the situation in the United States because that's where I live. And that situation is different in some important ways from here. So I'm not able to give you really detailed ideas about the situation in Germany. I met last week with 150 science and environmental journalists of Germany. We talk. I'll tell you what I told them. I don't think it will have any influence on them, and it won't have any influence on you either, but it's the only thing I know, so I'll tell you. When you look at the world, you can understand it in three different ways. You can look at the events, just what's happening. When I open up my web browser, there's a lot of stuff about events. You know, Kate is pregnant. An Indian bus turned over and killed this, and 400 people died in a Philippines typhoon, and some American senator did a really stupid thing, and Merkel is. So events. These are very entertaining, but they don't tell you anything, and they have no value, really. I mean, tomorrow I don't care about the Mexican bus or the Indians or etc. So I told the media, if you want to be significant, you have to move up. You can go to the next level where you start to see patterns of behavior. The death rate from buses is going up over time, or the number of people dying from typhoons is changing. I mean, so you start to see how these events are changing over time. That's patterns. And if you go above that, you come to causal structure, the cause-effect mechanisms that are producing these patterns of behavior. If the media could start to focus on the structure at the top level, they give us the basis for changing our habits. If they only focus on events, they don't give us any basis for changing. I mean, there's no way I know how to change my habits to have an influence on the number of people dying in a Philippines typhoon. It doesn't have any bearing. So I say, go on. Unfortunately, we're in a kind of vicious circle. The news media is driven, at least in the United States, by advertising. The advertisers, actually, they don't want to educate you, they want to sell you stuff. And so they just want to attract attention, and events attract more attention than patterns or causality. So the tendency is for the media to move over and focus on events. But this has the effect of basically, what we say, dumbing down the population. The population starts to be so interested in events, and they're not interested, they're bored by these other things. So the media has to focus even more on events. And so it's a vicious circle, which is coming to a very stupid media, unfortunately. Not one which is challenging us to change our habits. And I said to the journalists, it's difficult. If you are a journalist, you have to pick between reporting what you see and trying actually to educate the public. If you want to educate the public, you're going to have to report some things you don't see. You're going to have to go deeper and think about it. And this raises all sorts of economic and ethical problems. So I don't know what the right answer is, but presently I don't expect that the media is going to help us solve the problem. The media is a tool, it's a way to achieve what you want to do. So first of all, we have to figure out what we want and what that means, what we have to do, and then I think we could help the media. I give you a very quick example. A long time ago, in the United States, we noticed, so two things. First, many women and men watch soap operas every afternoon, sitting down watching the soap operas, which are these stories. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, soap operas. Very popular. That's the first thing we noticed. Second thing we noticed, the birth rate on the soap operas was higher than India or any place. Why? Because in the soap operas, whenever a couple has problems, the way they solve the problem is by having a baby. And of course, soap operas are about problems, so there are a lot of babies. But in real life, actually, statistically we know that if a couple is having problems and they have a baby, it makes the problems worse, not better. So we went to the people who write the soap operas, and we did a program for them, one in California and one in New York City, because they are on both sides. And we gave data about what's really going on. We gave data about the role of having babies to solve your problems, etc. And we couldn't tell them to do something different. We just gave them the facts. And actually, the birth rate came down on the soap operas. And they started talking about other things to solve problems. And so, in that way you can have some impact on habits. But just sitting here waiting for it to happen, I think it just goes down. Sorry.
Also, lieber Dennis Meadows, ich freue mich, dass du hier bist. Und gestern war ich auf dem Nachhaltigkeitskongress in Düsseldorf.
Das deutsche Nachhaltigkeitspreis.
Und da waren zum ersten Mal die Kommunen mit dabei. Also es ist 5 Jahre jetzt und der Geist auf Dennis und Donata war im Hintergrund, dass die Grenzen des Wachstums auch in den Unternehmen und in den Kommunen angekommen ist, die Realisation von Nachhaltigkeit vor Ort in den Unternehmungen, und das wurde dort und wird heute auch besprochen. Und ich möchte sagen, dass ich 1972 hier damals dieses Werk gelesen habe und seitdem in Action bin. Ich finde, das, was du gesagt hast, zum Schluss ist vollkommen richtig. Wir müssen den Hintern hochkriegen und wir müssen jeden Tag eine Action, eine Entscheidung treffen für das, was du hier uns heute dargestellt hast. Und ich bin dir außerordentlich dankbar, dass du uns nochmal Mut gemacht hast, auch mit der Arbeit deiner Frau zusammen, die ja eigentlich auch mit dabei ist. Nicht? Das finde ich ganz wichtig. Und ich habe gesehen, dass Leute, die, also jetzt gerade gestern den ganzen Tag, die vollkommen ignorant waren, vielleicht bisher diesen Problemen gegenüber, dass die nach Lösungen suchen, weil sie genau das wissen, was du eben gesagt hast.
So, das ist aber selbstverständlich keine Frage, aber ich bin Ihnen sehr dankbar, danke. Ob es zustimmen oder nicht, das will ich nicht sagen, aber danke schön.